in it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the trust. But the kind of ethos of it is that we share our training materials, we share our resources, and we invite people from the communities that we serve to come to the training as well. And it's also co-produced with service users, so it really is doing all the things that we want the transformation of services in our area to do. So I'm just going to share my slides, and we want to have some time for questioning. So you want me to sort of spend about half an hour, Ian, yeah?
Yes, please, Marion.
Okay. Right, can everybody see that? People sort of wave their hand. Yes, there's a thumbs up. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the NHS long-term plan has mentioned trauma-informed care as a way of thinking about about how we improve our services and how we improve our relationships with the communities that we serve and the people that we work with. There's a very strong evidence base for a link between trauma experienced in one's life with the mental health. So what we really want to do by adopting trauma-informed approaches is to kind of improve the way that we work with people, to improve people's outcomes and people's long-term health outcomes. And this is something that we need to do across healthcare and social care. Okay. If you Google trauma-informed care, you'll find a lot about it, and you'll find about the history of it. It originated in America in substance abuse services, and prior to that in sort of veteran services, when they realised that people who'd experienced traumatic experiences in their childhood and in their development were much more likely to present with really bad physical health problems. So if you go into a waiting room for cardiology or for cancer treatment, you will find the people in that waiting room have far higher levels of developmental trauma, sort of adverse experiences that have happened to them in childhood. So linking that up, it looks like it's one of the biggest sort of health opportunities for us really to work on. So that's a kind of quick summary. I am going to be talking about trauma a little bit, so it can sort of it might potentially trigger some things for yourself, so please be aware of that, and that it's perfectly normal to react in a sort of emotional way to hearing about trauma. Yeah, but please, I'm sure you've got your own coping strategies, and if you don't want to listen to some of it, you don't have to. All right. And you can email me. My email is there, and you'll have the presentation to take away with you too. All right. So I guess what we think of when we're thinking about trauma-informed care is thinking about how to work with people to recognise their specific needs that may be as a result of trauma. Yeah. So what I was talking about before, adverse childhood experiences. Who's heard of adverse childhood experiences? Anybody? Put their hands up. Yeah, lots of you. Okay. So there's a lovely talk by Nadine Burke Harris, who's the sort of chief physician in California, used to be a sort of paediatrician in California, and she's got a lovely TED talk which I've referenced at the end, which talks about adverse childhood experiences and the impact on the entire health and well-being of the nation. So they discovered that people who'd experienced adverse childhood experiences were much more likely to present with chronic life-threatening illnesses, be exposed to domestic violence, likely to have been abused in childhood. All of these things are likely to present as trauma, which then result in really costly interventions by health and social care and in the future when they're grown up. So things like parental incarceration, parental substance abuse, they found a link. So there's an ACEs scoring system, and the higher you score, the more likely you are to have certain conditions. And any of you who know about ACEs know that's been a bit problematic, because insurance companies in America can seize on your ACEs score and charge you more money. And that's not how we want to use it. We want to use it to raise awareness of how we can help people presenting to mental health services. Okay, so that's a neat little slide that shows you how things overlap. So we're no longer talking about, when I talk about trauma-informed care, I'm not talking about PTSD. I'm not talking about, although lots of people would meet criteria for PTSD, as in post-traumatic stress disorder, we're not talking about necessarily a single incident trauma. So somebody who's been in a car crash or witnessed something traumatic happen to somebody else. We're talking about the kind of long-term ongoing things that happen to people in our communities, and who arrive in our communities as well. So in East London, we have a lot of people from different countries who've come here, not because they wanted to come here, but because they had to leave where they were because it was too dangerous for them. I don't think I've ever met somebody who had a single incident trauma, to be honest, in all my years of working as a psychologist and psychotherapist. So someone who had a car crash on the way to the park with their kids, for example. Okay, so when we're talking about trauma-informed care, we're talking about the kind of key principles that really overarch somebody's experiences in services. And this is a kind of neat summary, which I'm going to go into a little more detail about. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about a cultural and historical context of somebody, and we're talking about every single interaction that we have with somebody, even if they're phoning up for a referral form or phoning up for some help with benefits. We are talking about making that an intervention that can be helpful and using it in a trauma-informed way. So, for example, in Newham Psychotherapy Services, we have a waiting room with a great big perspex sheet of glass stuff between the receptionist and the service user who comes in to say, I've got an appointment at 3 o'clock with Marion Bates. The receptionist can't hear what the service user is saying, and the service user can't hear what the receptionist is saying. And if you think about somebody coming in there who's already feeling very, very anxious about starting, their journey in therapy, that can trigger all sorts of experiences they might have had in the past of not being listened to. And that's a sort of example of how we can make our environment more trauma informed. How can we make the application forms we have less complicated so that we're not at risk of re-traumatizing people? So that's the sort of things we want to think about. Okay, I should say our trauma-informed care training that we provide in the Trust is a whole day, so I'm trying to squidge it all in, okay? So what we're looking at in terms of the 6 key principles of trauma-informed care are offering people safety, and by that we mean relational safety as well as physical safety. So safety in the room when we're talking to somebody about what they need from us or what's happened to them. Yeah, we're talking about building trust with people. We're talking about useful collaborative interventions, so we're not doing to somebody. We're not just giving them a prescription. We're working alongside them in their recovery journey. We're offering people choice, empowering people to have a sort of positive impact on their own recovery, and we're taking into account the historical experiences of somebody, and that includes race and culture and gender and other sort of protected characteristics. So disabled people, how they are experiencing, how many of our services still don't have lifts, for example. Okay. So the sort of key principles that an organisation wants to adopt really when we're thinking about being a trauma-informed organisation are, this kind of safety. We're looking at trustworthiness, transparency. We're talking about in the collaboration, we're including kind of peer support and respect for service users' views of their own, they're the expert in their own experiences and their own conditions that they might have. We're empowering people to be much more involved, and I've said the other bits already. Okay. So this just sort of summarises that. So we really want staff, clients and different organisations to work together with all of this, and I don't think it's anything necessarily new, trauma-informed care, but what it is understanding that when somebody presents to you, we need to take account what's happened to somebody, and that they may be presenting with very difficult behaviour in sort of old terms, but that may be reflecting the fact that they're in a state of fear from arising from previous experiences of trauma. Okay, so we want to be really, really aware of our own biases and how we work with people. So when we choose an interpreter, are we choosing the right gender? Are we making sure that we're offering somebody choice about what dialect they may be speaking, or if they know the interpreter? Quite often that happens, doesn't it? And that can then have an impact on how someone presents. So all of these things that we're already doing probably are under a kind of trauma-informed umbrella. Okay, so the 4 R's is what we spend a lot of time talking about. And this is a model that you can apply to your organisation to think about, are we trauma-informed? So trauma-informed care, first of all, realises that there's a huge impact of trauma, and it understands that there are, many, many different paths for a person's recovery. So we're realising that trauma has a huge impact. We are recognising the signs and symptoms of trauma in our clients. So we're not offering you tools to diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder, or to not even offering you skills to actually treat it either. So this isn't about therapy. This is about being able to recognise signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families and staff, and anybody else involved in the system. So we're really recognising if you have a colleague who seems to be a bit off or behaving in a strange way, is there something going on for them? Are we all experiencing a level of trauma from the last 2 years where we've been stuck in our spare rooms on computers, talking to each other, or working in the community feeling unsafe, and lacking that emotional connection of being around other people? So we're recognising signs and symptoms of trauma in people, and understanding that staff may have a huge degree of burnout. So that's the lovely thing about trauma-informed care, is that it encompasses kind of well-being of staff, as well as, it prioritises staff as well as service users. So we've recognised the signs and symptoms, and then we need to work out how to respond. So we want to respond by really understanding how our policies and procedures and practices are informed by the experiences of trauma. So we want to make our things that we have to do as part of our bureaucratic system, we want to make those as trauma informed as possible. So if I give a service user a ton of questionnaires to fill in because I need it for my audit trail to get my funding renewed, I don't really want to be putting in there, when was the last time you felt suicidal in the last week, when I haven't met them before and they're sitting feeling terrified in a waiting room, or potentially. So really thinking about how can we simplify things, make things more accessible to people without the potential of re-triggering people. So we're responding by really always thinking, are we trauma informed? Are we doing this in a compassionate way? And the last R is resist. So we are trying to actively resist re-traumatization. And a lot of our work over the past few years has been in inpatient settings. So particularly looking at policies around restrictive practice, so restraint, putting people in seclusion, the sort of sectioning procedures, and really thinking about how that has huge potential to re-traumatize people. So people become more disturbed sometimes being in hospital when they've had to be restrained for their own safety, but it's done in such a way that's quite traumatizing. So one of the examples is on an inpatient ward where men would be brought in often by police. Now that can be very triggering for staff and for service users already on the ward. So they agreed that the policeman would come in without their hats on, for example. Simple things like that are really important. and that we really look at how we're restraining people. So if we're having to hold somebody down and inject them, are we at risk of triggering memories of sexual abuse, for example, that they've had? And this is the feedback service users have given us about their experiences. So we're trying to actively resist re-traumatizing people. So when people phone up and we're signposting them to different services, how do we manage that in a way that doesn't look like we're saying, oh no, you don't fit our criteria, off you go somewhere else? So how do we manage that, for example? So there's loads of examples we can think of about how we unwillingly re-traumatize people in our services. And it's not that any of us went into the job to deliberately traumatize people, but unfortunately, I'm sure a lot of you will speak to service users who feel they have been traumatized by the services that they've received from physical and mental and social, statutory organisations. Is everybody following me? Are we all right? I'm just checking in. Yeah. Okay. It's a bit of a whistle stop, this. Oh, so now I actually had slides that told you all of that stuff. So let's just check. So yes, we're not talking about PTSD. We're talking about the kind of trauma that happens every day, or unfortunately, really huge things that happen repeatedly to people that come to our attention. So we can think about natural disasters, war, murder, experiences of that really extreme type, but also bullying, daily racism, arriving in the UK thinking it's going to be brilliant and then being discriminated against from day one, for example, sexism, homophobia, all sorts of things, neglect, poverty, all of these things, can have an impact on somebody's presentation. Okay, oops. So if somebody's being aggressive, we need to question why they might be doing that. Yeah. Is it because they're scared? Is it a response to a threat that we might think is an overreaction, but it actually doesn't seem to be at that moment in time for that person because they've had some past experience of being belittled or fobbed off or whatever in their past that they're responding to. And for you guys and for us in the health service, it's thinking about vicarious trauma, which is absorbing other people's trauma. So I don't know if you've ever had a really troubling phone call or something you find yourself dreaming about. Service users you might have spoken to, or people who've experienced really difficult things, and very often we can kind of be traumatized ourselves from what we're hearing in our day-to-day work. And it's not everybody that happens to, or not everybody that has that effect on us, but it's a large part of what we do. And you only have to look at the unfortunately, there are so many examples in the pandemic, but looking at the levels of staff absences in physical healthcare settings and in intensive care units to understand the kind of levels of trauma that staff have experienced from their work in the pandemic. Yeah, so you might notice yourself feeling unable to relax, thinking about work all the time, maybe feeling guilty about things you haven't done for somebody, wanting to go the extra mile for people. We want to look after people, don't we? Or we wouldn't have gone into this job. So we're sort of quite vulnerable ourselves to experiencing trauma. Okay, burnout. There you go. Okay, so how we respond, we need to get all our policies, procedures, everything out and have a look at them and work out, is there anything we could be doing that would be, we could get rid of, anything we can change that would fit into a sort of trauma-informed framework. And that needs to be done with those principles that I said at the beginning that have involve collaboration and sort of mutual input from the people who use our services. So yeah, we're thinking about how we respond on a big scale. We're talking about a big culture shift here. Yeah, we want to contribute to a long-lasting change as well. So it's not just about what we're training people. Come on my one-day trauma-informed care training and then everything, then you're trauma-informed. You're not. It's about how we support people to go and really make a lasting change within their services. And it might seem like a lot of work, but after a while, it should make your jobs easier. So we've noticed that on the wards when we've had really poor staffing levels, people have said to me, well, I can't do all this, it's extra work, and what we really need is more staff. And what we found on one of our intensive care wards in Tower Hamlets was that actually we didn't need so many staff when people were working in a more trauma-informed and responsive way. So sometimes staff feel very, very stressed and actually fearful in their jobs, and they might spend a lot of time in the nursing office, for example. That doesn't really help anybody. And so by getting people out more, talking to service users and being on the ward more, everybody feels safer. As I said before, we all went into our jobs to help people. So knowing what our own values are as a mental health worker or support worker, whatever it is that you do, how can you shape your career in line with these principles so that it meets your values as well? And I think everybody, there's nothing you can disagree with really in terms of trauma-informed care. Yeah. Okay. And then we've got the resisting bit, which I've said. So we can make practical changes to ensure our services are experienced as safe spaces. So I can make sure that I print things on yellow paper if somebody has dyslexia, for example, because they're not going to then be really triggered by their kind of memories of being treated badly at school, for example, or whatever it might be. Yeah. How can we work in a more trauma-informed way to reduce the distress somebody's experiencing by not really doing very much, not by prescribing things or providing therapy. We're changing small things about what we do for people. Yeah. How can we create safer spaces for people? There's a video that's 8 minutes that's I'm not sure we've got time to show it actually. It would be lovely if you could all watch it on your own perhaps. It's an 8-minute video produced by the Scottish service, who have pretty much, well, they're on a mission to make Scotland a trauma-informed country. So in Scotland, there are different levels of trauma-informed and trauma-aware training, such that even a bus driver has had some training in trauma-informed care, so that he or she knows that if somebody gets on the bus and is aggressive towards them, how to respond in a non-re-traumatizing way. So to understand that perhaps that person's aggressive because of something that's happened to them in the past, and that it's not anything to do with the bus driver. And that can help improve the relationship with people, and sort of understand that maybe people behave in slightly, in troubling ways because of what's happened to them, not because of something they want to do to you, because they're being deliberately aggressive or difficult. So, and that goes right up to sort of trauma specialist roles where people are trained to treat trauma. So Ian, did you just post the video in? You did, didn't you? So so NES Scotland have this, it's a national, I can't remember what it stands for now, God, National Education Scotland or something. They have a whole team who provide trauma-informed training across different organisations. And it's a sort of staff of psychologists in the NHS who do that. And they have produced lots and lots of really lovely videos in really, really thick Scottish accents. So even though we use them, I'd dearly love to have some more appropriate ones for our area. But I would urge you to watch it. It's really lovely, but it's also quite moving. Yeah. Okay, so it's a really helpful video. So there it is. I'm not going to show it to you today, but it looks like this. Okay, so that's it. NHS Education for Scotland, transforming psychological trauma. So they have this whole framework basically for the Scottish workforce. And in England, we don't have that, but NHS England is actively looking and has sort of various things on its website about it, about how to create sort of trauma-informed services. So one of the things that we're kind of basing our work on is thinking about this system of levels, like I told you. So a sort of trauma-informed practice level where people understand a certain amount of skills and knowledge for everybody in the Scottish workforce they have. Then people who have direct experience, so maybe paramedics, for example, might have a different level of understanding of what they might be seeing when they go out to see people in their ambulances. We have a kind of more trauma enhanced level, and then a sort of trauma specialist. So in Newham, we're rolling out a trauma-informed care day training in the primary care transformation services that involves ELF staff and voluntary sector staff, and social services staff. And we've so far done 6 of these, and I guess it's at a sort of trauma skilled practice level, really, so the second level. And what we want to do next, what we're trying to do, is get managers to come and have more thinking with us about how they can create more trauma-informed teams to really embed the knowledge and increase the trauma-informed approaches that they offer. Oh, look, I'm preempting my slides here. So that's what we've done. We've done this trauma-informed care package. It's a sort of 3 blocks of slide and video presentations, and in between each block we have a set of sort of questions which encourages people to reflect on where they might have seen trauma manifesting in their own work and how they could maybe change what they do in their daily life and work life to improve their services and to keep them to keep them going and being more trauma informed. There are lots of things across the country that are kind of supportive. So we have a whole collaboration across London for acute and inpatient settings. That is the 10 London trusts who have a position statement on trauma-informed care in acute settings. And we have various sort of trauma-informed care communities of practice in the communities, in outpatients and across sort of social care that we're also involved with. And this is all done in co-production with service users. So the principles of trauma-informed care and all of the references were developed from the ground up by service users and staff, predominantly in America, where, as I said before, substance abuse services realised that they couldn't just treat the substance abuse. They had to treat what was causing somebody to abuse substances. So they noticed there were an awful lot of veterans in substance abuse services, and they couldn't really ignore that. So we need to address the substance abuse, but we also need to address the underlying causes of why they're using substance abuse as a coping strategy. There's no point removing it if we're not going to replace that coping strategy with something and really understand why somebody's doing that in the first place. Okay. There is also sort of more thinking around trauma-informed leadership. How do we work as compassionate leaders to support people who work for us? And how do we ensure that a trauma-informed approach is embedded throughout the whole organisation? So trauma-informed care encompasses staff, policies, and also what we do with our daily work on the ground. And there's just 3 things that you can look at. So you can look at the Scotland trauma framework and think how wonderful it is in Scotland. It's not all rosy, but they've been at it a long time, and they've got a sort of much smaller population than we have in England. We've got the talk on ACEs by Nadine Burke-Harris, which is really lovely, short, sort of digestible talk about the impact of childhood trauma on health across the lifespan. And it really, hammers home, actually, if we can address this, we can reduce the spending in terms of physical health, impact in the future. So diabetes, smoking related conditions, lots of other things. And there's a little sort of challenging article there, but Angela Sweeney, who's a big name in trauma-informed care in the UK. So what is trauma-informed and what isn't trauma-informed? So just saying you're trauma informed isn't good enough. We have to really look at everything that we're doing, and we have to have our leadership and our executive bodies also learning about this. So in Elft, we've sort of worked from the ground up by working in the inpatient units and in the community, but we are also trying to get our executive body, if Mohit's listening, to take forward the trauma-informed approaches and really think about how we can have a coherent strategy that isn't sort of run by 4 trauma specialists across the trust, that's really embodied by the people who run an organisation, because that's much more likely to happen then, isn't it? So that's a whistle-stop tour of, as I say, a day's training has a lot more information about trauma and why people present the way they do, and a lot more reflection about what you might be able to take away from it.